The rain was falling hard on the streets of Chicago. People ran under store awnings and held newspapers over their heads. Inside Romano's restaurant, the warm lights made everything feel safe and cozy. The smell of fresh bread and garlic filled the air. Soft music played in the background while people talked and laughed at their tables. Margaret Chun tied her black apron around her waist and looked at herself in the small mirror by the kitchen door. Her long black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She had been working at Romano's for 8 months now. The job helped her pay for nursing school. Every day was the same: take orders, serve food, smile at customers, and count her tips. At the end of the night, she was 23 years old and tired most of the time. Between school and work, she barely had time to sleep. But she had dreams, big dreams. She wanted to be a nurse and help sick people. Her mother always told her that dreams were worth fighting for. Margaret picked up her notepad and pen. She looked. At the dining room, through the small window in the kitchen door, table 7 had just been seated. A man in an expensive suit sat alone. He looked important. Rich people always came to Romano's because the food was good and the service was excellent. She walked out of the kitchen and smiled. The restaurant was busy tonight. Every table was full. The other servers moved quickly between tables. Margaret loved busy nights because busy nights meant good tips. Good tips meant she could pay her rent and buy groceries. She approached table 7. The man was looking at some papers. He had gray hair and wore a gold watch. His suit looked like it cost more money than Margaret made in 3 months. She had learned to recognize expensive things from working at Romano's. Rich people dressed differently. They talked differently. They even sat differently. "Good evening," Margaret said with her best smile. "Welcome to Romano's. Can I start you with something to drink?" The man looked up from his papers. He had kind eyes but looked tired. "Yes, thank you. I'll have a glass of your best red wine." "Of course. Would you like to hear about our specials tonight?" "Not yet. Just the wine for now, please." Margaret nodded and walked to the bar. Tony, the bartender, was already pouring drinks for other tables. She waited her turn and watched the dining room. Table 3 needed more bread. Table 5 was ready for dessert. Table 12 was asking for the check. She made mental notes about what she needed to do. "Wine for table 7, Tony said, sliding the glass across the bar. Margaret picked up the wine and walked back to table 7. The man was still reading his papers. She could see numbers and charts, business stuff. She set the wine down carefully next to his papers. "Thank you," he said without looking up. Margaret turned to leave, but the man spoke again. "Excuse me. Could you recommend something?" "I'm not very hungry, but I should eat something," Margaret smiled. "The salmon is very good tonight. It comes with vegetables and rice. Or if you want something lighter, we have a nice soup and salad." "The salmon sounds perfect," Margaret wrote down his order. As she wrote, the light from the chandelier above caught her ring. It was a small ring on her right hand. Not expensive, but pretty. It had a green stone in the center and small designs carved around it. Her mother had given it to her on her 18th birthday. The man's eyes moved to her hand. Margaret noticed him staring at the ring. His face changed. The color left his cheeks. His hand holding the wine glass started to shake. "Sir, are you okay?" Margaret asked. She was worried he might be having a heart attack or something. The man set down his wine glass. His hands were shaking more now. He kept staring at her ring like he had seen a ghost. "That ring," he said in a quiet voice. "Where did you get that?" "Ring?" Margaret looked down at her hand. "This? My mother gave it to me." "Why?" The man's breathing became fast. He looked like he was going to be sick. Other customers at nearby tables started to notice. Margaret didn't know what to do. She had never seen someone react like this to a piece of jewelry. "Your mother?" the man said. His voice was barely a whisper. "What's your mother's name?" This was getting strange. Margaret felt uncomfortable. Why was this man asking about her mother? But he looked so upset that she felt sorry for him. "Elena," she said. "Elena Chun, but I don't understand why you're..." asking. The man closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were full of tears. Margaret had never seen a grown man cry before. At least not like this. He looked like his whole world had just fallen apart. Elena-shun, he repeated. Does she have a ring like that too? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, she has one exactly like mine. She said they were special, made by someone she knew a long time ago. The man put his head in his hands. Margaret looked around the restaurant. Other servers were busy with their tables. No one else seemed to notice what was happening. She didn't know if she should call the manager or just leave the man alone. Sir, should I get you some water? You look very pale. The man looked up at her again. He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. Margaret felt uncomfortable under his stare. She started to wonder if this man was crazy or dangerous. You look like her, he said softly. You have her eyes, her smile. Look like who? Your mother. You look just like your mother did when she was your age. Margaret felt cold suddenly. How could this stranger know what her mother looked like when she was young? Her mother never talked about her past. She never mentioned old friends or boyfriends. Margaret knew almost nothing about her mother's life before she was born. How do you know my mother? Margaret asked. The man was quiet for a long time. He picked up his wine glass, but his hands were still shaking. He set it down again without drinking. I knew her a long time ago, he said finally. Before you were born, we were very close? Margaret felt her heart start beating faster. This was impossible. Her mother had always told her that her father left before she was born, that he didn't want a family, that it was just the two of them against the world. But this man seemed to know things about her mother that no one else knew. What's your name? Margaret asked. James Morrison, he said. And 25 years ago I was in love with your mother. The restaurant seemed to disappear around them. The sounds of other customers, the clinking of glasses, the music, everything faded away. Margaret stared at this man who claimed to know her mother, who seemed to recognize a ring that her mother said was special, who looked at her like he was seeing a ghost from his past. Margaret's legs felt weak. She grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But the look in James Morrison's eyes told her that everything was about to change. Margaret felt like the floor was moving under her feet. She looked around the restaurant to make sure no one was watching. The other customers were eating and talking like nothing had happened, but for Margaret, everything had just changed. You knew my mother? She asked again. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. James Morrison nodded. His eyes were still full of tears. Elena-chun, she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Smart, funny, kind. We met in college in San Francisco. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down. She knew she should be working, but her legs felt too weak to stand. My mother went to college in San Francisco? Yes, she was studying art. She wanted to be a teacher. She painted the most amazing pictures. James wiped his eyes with his napkin. We were together for 2 years, the best 2 years of my life. Margaret's mind was spinning. Her mother had never told her about college. About art? About San Francisco? All Margaret knew was that they had always lived in Chicago. Just the two of them in a small apartment. Her mother worked as a cleaning lady at an office building. She had never mentioned painting or teaching or any dreams she used to have. I don't understand, Margaret said. My mother never told me about any of this. James looked surprised. She never talked about her past? Never. She always said the past didn't matter. Only the future mattered. James was quiet for a moment. He picked up his wine glass but didn't drink from it. That sounds like something Elena would say. She always looked forward, never backward. Margaret stared at her ring. It suddenly felt heavy on her finger. You said this ring was special. How do you know about it? James reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small black box. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was a ring exactly like Margaret's. Same green stone, same carved designs, same size. Margaret gasped. How do you have that? I had them made, James said quietly. 25 years ago. There were only 2 rings like this in the whole world. I gave one to your mother. I kept the other one. Margaret stared at the ring in the box. It looked exactly like the one on her finger. Exactly the same. Why did you keep it? Because I was going to give it to her when I asked her to marry me. The words hit Margaret like a punch in the stomach. Marry her? I had it all planned out. We were going to graduate in a few months. I was going to ask her to be my wife. I loved her more than anything in the world. Margaret felt tears starting in her own eyes. But you didn't marry her. No, James said sadly. She disappeared before I could ask her. Disappeared? James closed the ring box and put it back in his pocket. One day she was there. The next day she was gone. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. She just vanished from my life. Margaret tried to understand what she was hearing. Her mother had run away from this man? But why? He seemed nice. He seemed to really care about her mother. Did you try to find her? Margaret asked. I looked everywhere. I called her friends. I went to her apartment. I even hired a private detective. But Elena Chun had disappeared completely, like she never existed. Margaret thought about her mother. Elena had always been secretive about her past. She never talked about old friends or places she used to live. When Margaret asked questions, her mother would change the subject or say it wasn't important. Why are you telling me this? Margaret asked. James looked at her with sad eyes. Because you're her daughter. And because seeing that ring brought back 25 years of memories. Margaret felt confused and angry and sad all at the same time. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know you're not making this up? James reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out his wallet. He opened it and took out an old photograph. The picture was wrinkled and faded. He handed it to Margaret. Margaret looked at the photograph and felt her breath catch in. Her throat. It was her mother, but not the mother she knew. This was a young woman with long black hair and a bright smile. She was wearing a pretty dress and laughing. She looked happy. Really happy. Happier than Margaret had ever seen her mother look, and next to her in the photograph was James Morrison. He looked much younger, but it was definitely him. He had his arm around her mother's waist. They both looked so in love. This was taken at a party in 1999, James said. 3 weeks before she disappeared, Margaret stared at the photograph. Her mother looked so different, so young and free and full of joy. The mother Margaret knew was always tired, always worried about money, always working. She had never seen her mother smile the way she was smiling in this picture. Can I keep this? Margaret asked. Of course. I have others at home. Margaret put the photograph in her apron pocket. She felt like she was holding a piece of her mother's secret life, a life she never knew existed. There's something else, James said quietly. Margaret looked up at him. What? When is your birthday? The question seemed strange. November 15th. Why? James closed his eyes again. When he opened them, more tears were falling. November 15th, 1999. Margaret felt the room start to spin. She did quick math in her head. Her mother disappeared from San Francisco in early 1999. Margaret was born in November 1999, 9 months. How old are you? James asked, though he seemed to already know the answer. 23, Margaret whispered. James put his head in his hands. 23 years old. Born 9 months after Elena disappeared. Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But all the pieces were fitting together like a terrible puzzle. Are you saying? Margaret started to ask, but she couldn't finish the question. James looked at her again. He studied her face carefully. You have my eyes, he said softly, and Elena's smile, and my mother's nose. Margaret stood up quickly. The chair fell backward and made a loud noise. Other customers turned to look. Margaret didn't care. She needed air. She needed to think. She needed to get away from this man and his impossible story. I have to go, she said. Margaret, wait, no, this is crazy. You're crazy, my mother would have told me if. But even as she said it, Margaret knew it wasn't true. Her mother never told her anything about her past. James stood up too. Please don't run away like your mother did. Please let me explain. Explain what? That you might be my father? That my mother lied to me my whole life? That everything I thought I knew is wrong? James reached out to her, but Margaret stepped back. I know this is a shock, but we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what really happened. Margaret looked around the restaurant. Her manager was watching from across the room. Other servers were staring. Customers were turning in their seats to see what was happening. I can't do this here, Margaret said. I can't do this now. Then when? Where? Margaret's mind was racing. She needed time to think. She needed to talk to her mother. She needed to understand what was happening to her life. Tomorrow, she said finally, meet me at Café Luna on State Street at 2:00. I'll be there, James said. Margaret turned and walked quickly toward the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. In her apron pocket, the old photograph felt like it was burning against her leg. She pushed through the kitchen doors and leaned against the wall. The other kitchen workers looked at her with concern. You okay, Margaret? Asked Rosa, one of the cooks. Margaret nodded, but she wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. In the space of 20 minutes, her entire life had been turned upside down. The ring on her finger suddenly felt like the heaviest thing in the world. She pulled out the photograph and looked at it again. Her mother's young, happy face stared back at her. Margaret realized she was looking at a stranger. A woman she had never met. A woman who had secrets and dreams and a whole life that Margaret knew nothing about. Margaret put the photograph back in her pocket and picked up her notepad. She had to finish her shift. She had to pretend that nothing had happened. But inside, she was already planning what she would say to her mother when she got home. Some conversations couldn't wait until tomorrow. Margaret could barely focus on her work for the rest of the night. She spilled water on table 12. She forgot to bring bread to table 3. She gave the wrong order table 8. Her manager, Mr. Romano, pulled her aside near the end of her shift. Margaret, you seem distracted tonight. Is everything okay? Margaret forced a smile. I'm fine, Mr. Romano, just tired from school. He looked at her with concern. Go home early, get some rest. We can handle the last few tables, Margaret nodded gratefully. She untied her apron and grabbed her purse from the employee locker. The photograph was still in her apron pocket. She moved it to her purse and walked out into the cold Chicago night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. Margaret walked quickly toward the bus stop. Her mind was full of questions. Was James Morrison really her father? Why had her mother run away from him? Why had she never told Margaret about her past? The bus ride to her apartment felt like it took forever. Margaret stared out the window at the city lights and tried to make sense of what had happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph. Her mother's young, happy face, James Morrison's arm around her waist. They looked so in love. Margaret's apartment building was old and small. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and stood. Outside apartment 3B, she could hear the television playing inside. Her mother was probably watching her favorite show and eating dinner from a microwave tray. Margaret took a deep breath and opened the door. Mom, I'm home. Elena Chun was sitting on the couch in her work uniform. She was a small woman with graying black hair and tired eyes. She looked up when Margaret walked in. You're early tonight, Elena said. Did you have a good shift? Margaret sat down in the chair across from her mother. Mom, we need to talk. Elena could tell something was wrong. She muted the television and gave Margaret her full attention. What's wrong? You look upset. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out the photograph. She handed it to her mother without saying a word. Elena looked at the photograph and her face went completely white. Her hands started shaking. The photograph fell to the floor. Where did you get this? Elena whispered. A man came to the restaurant. Tonight, he said he knew you. He said his name was James Morrison. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, they were full of tears. Oh, God, she said. After all these years, Margaret leaned forward. Mom, is he my father? Elena was quiet for a long time. She picked up the photograph from the floor and stared at it. Margaret could see her mother's hands shaking. "Mom, please. I need to know the truth." Elena looked at her daughter with sad eyes. "How much did he tell you?" "He said you were in college. Together in San Francisco. He said you were in love. He said you disappeared without telling him goodbye." Elena nodded slowly. "All of that is true. And he showed me a ring exactly like mine. He said he had them made." Elena held up her right hand. She was wearing the same ring she had worn every day for as long as Margaret could remember. "He gave me this ring on my 20th birthday. He said it was a promise ring, a promise that we would always be together." Margaret felt her heart breaking. "But you left him." "I had to," Elena said quietly. "Why? He seems like a nice man." "He said he loved you." Elena stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city lights. "It's complicated, Margaret. You don't understand what it was like. Then explain it to me." "I'm not a child anymore, Mom. I'm 23 years old." "I deserve to know the truth about my father." Elena turned around. "Your father? Is James Morrison my father?" Elena was quiet for a very long time. Margaret could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She could hear cars driving by outside. She could hear her own heartbeat. "Yes," Elena said finally. "James Morrison is your father." Margaret felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She had suspected it, but hearing her mother say it out loud made it real. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was trying to protect you. And protect myself." "Protect us from what?" Elena walked back to the couch and sat down. She picked up the photograph again. James came from a very wealthy family. His parents owned a big company. They had plans for him, big plans. "What kind of plans?" "They wanted him to marry a girl from another rich family. They wanted him to take over the family business. They wanted him to live a certain kind of life." Margaret shook her head. "But he loved you." "Yes, he did. And I loved him, more than I had ever loved anyone." "But love isn't always enough, Margaret." "What do you mean?" Elena sighed. "I met his parents once. They made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for their son. I was just a poor art student with no money and no family connections. They thought I was trying to trap James for his money." Margaret felt angry. "That's not fair. Life isn't fair, honey. Rich people and poor people live in different worlds. James didn't see it because he was young and in love. But I saw it. I saw how his parents looked at me. I saw how his friends treated me. I knew that if we stayed together, we would both be miserable." "So you just left?" Elena nodded. "I found out I was pregnant right before graduation. I was scared and confused. I didn't know what to do." "Why didn't you tell James about the baby?" "Because I knew what would happen. He would have wanted to marry me because it was the right thing to do. Not because he wanted to, but because he felt like he had to. His parents would have hated me even more. They would have thought I got pregnant on purpose to trap him." Margaret felt tears starting in her eyes. "So you decided to raise me alone. I thought it was the best thing for everyone. I moved to Chicago and started over. I got a job and worked hard to take care of you. I wanted to give you a better life than I had." Margaret looked around their small apartment. The old furniture, the peeling paint on the walls, the broken window that her mother had covered with cardboard. "This is the better life you wanted for me." Elena's face crumpled. "I did the best I could, Margaret. I worked 2 jobs for years to pay for your food and clothes and school supplies. I never asked James for money because I didn't want him to feel obligated to help us. But maybe he would have wanted to help. Maybe he would have wanted to be part of my life. Maybe," Elena said quietly. But I was too afraid to find out." Margaret stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the same view her mother had been looking at. "Do you ever think about him?" "Every day," Elena admitted. "Not a day goes by that I don't wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. If I had told him about you, if I had been brave enough to fight for our love." Margaret turned around. "He kept your ring, Mom. For 25 years, he kept the ring he was going to give you when he asked you to marry him." Elena started crying harder. He was going to propose. He said he had it all planned out. He was going to ask you to marry him after graduation. Elena put her head in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? Margaret sat down next to her mother and put her arm around her. You did what you thought was right. You were young and scared and trying to protect me, but I robbed you of having a father. I robbed James of having a daughter. I robbed myself of the love of my life. It's not too late, Mom. Elena looked up at her daughter. What do you mean? I'm meeting him tomorrow at Café Luna. You should come with me. Elena shook her head. I can't. It's been too long. Too much has happened. He still loves you, Mom. I could see it in his eyes when he talked about you. That was 25 years ago, Margaret. We're different people now. He's probably married. He probably has other children. Margaret thought about the sadness she had seen in James Morrison's eyes. I don't think he's married. I think he's been waiting for you all these years. Elena looked at the photograph again. I was so young. So stupid. I thought I was being noble by leaving. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. But now you have a chance to make things right. Elena wiped her eyes. I don't know if I'm brave enough. You're the bravest person I know, Mom. You raised me by yourself. You worked hard jobs to pay for my education. You sacrificed everything for me. And look how it turned out. You're working in a restaurant to pay for school. You're tired all the time. You don't have time for friends or fun or dating. Margaret smiled. But I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to help people. You taught me that dreams are worth fighting for. Elena hugged her daughter tightly. I love you so much, Margaret. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too, Mom. But don't you think it's time to stop being afraid? Elena pulled back and looked at her daughter. What if he hates me for keeping you away from him? Then we'll deal with that together. But what if he doesn't? What if he understands why you did what you did? Elena was quiet for a long time. Margaret could see her mother thinking, weighing the options, trying to decide if she was brave enough to face the past. Okay, Elena said finally. I'll come with you tomorrow, Margaret smiled. Really? Really? It's time to stop running. It's time to face the truth. Margaret hugged her mother again. Tomorrow was going to change everything. For better or worse, the secrets were finally going to come out. And maybe, just maybe, her family would finally be complete. Margaret woke up before her alarm went off. She had barely slept all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James Morrison's face. She heard his voice saying, I was in love with your mother. She thought about the ring in the black box. The ring he had kept for 25 years. She got up and made coffee. Her mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in her robe. Elena looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. How are you feeling? Margaret asked. Elena shrugged. Scared, nervous, like I might throw up. Margaret sat down across from her mother. We don't have to do this if you're not ready. No, Elena said firmly, we do have to do this. I've been running from the truth for 25 years. It's time to stop. They ate breakfast in silence. Margaret could tell her mother was thinking about what she was going to say to James. How do you apologize for 25 years of secrets? How do you explain why you kept a man's daughter away from him? At 1 o'clock they got dressed and left the apartment. Margaret wore her best dress and her mother's ring. Elena wore a simple black dress and her matching ring. They looked like they were going to a funeral instead of a reunion. The bus ride to Café Luna took 30 minutes. Neither of them spoke. Margaret held her mother's hand and felt how cold it was. Elena stared out the window at the city passing by. Café Luna was a small coffee shop on State Street. It was the kind of place where college students studied and business people had meetings. Margaret had chosen it because it was quiet and private. They arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Margaret looked around the cafe and saw James Morrison sitting at a table in the corner. He was wearing a different suit than yesterday, but he looked just as nervous as Elena did. There he is, Margaret said quietly. Elena looked across the cafe and saw James for the first time in 25 years. He looked older, of course. His hair was gray and he had lines around his eyes. But he was still the same man she had loved in college. He looks good, Elena said softly. Come on, Margaret said. Let's go talk to him. They walked across the cafe together. James looked up when they approached. His eyes moved from Margaret to Elena. For a moment, nobody spoke. The air between them was thick with 25 years of memories and regrets. Hello, James. Elena said quietly. James stood up. Elena, you look. He paused, searching for the right words. You look beautiful. Elena blushed. Thank you. You look well, too. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Margaret realized that her parents didn't know how to act around each other anymore. They had been apart longer than they had been together. Please sit down, James said, pulling out chairs for both of them. Elena sat down across from James. Margaret sat between them. She felt like she was in the middle of something very important and very fragile. I can't believe you're here, James said to Elena. I looked for you for so long. I know, Elena said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. James leaned forward. Why did you leave, Elena? Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? Elena looked down at her hands. I was scared. Your parents made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for you. I thought if I told you about the baby, you would marry me out of obligation. I didn't want that. Obligation? James looked confused. Elena, I was planning to propose to you. I was going to ask you to marry me because I loved you. Not because I had to, Elena started crying. I didn't know. I thought you would choose your family over me. I would have chosen you, James said firmly. I would have chosen you every time. Margaret watched her parents and felt her heart breaking. So much pain, so much wasted time. All because of fear and misunderstanding. I made a mistake, Elena said through her tears. I see that now. I was young and stupid, and I made the wrong choice. James reached across the table and took her hand. We were both young. We both made mistakes. But I kept Margaret away from you. I robbed you of 23 years with your daughter. James looked at Margaret. She turned out amazing. You did a good job raising her. I did my best, Elena said. But she deserved to have a father. She deserved to know where she came from. Margaret spoke up. I'm not angry, Mom. I understand why you did what you did. James smiled at her. You're very mature for your age. You have your mother's kindness and wisdom. And your eyes, Elena said softly. She has your eyes. James studied Margaret's face. She has your smile and your determination. I can see how hard she works. She's going to be a nurse, Elena said proudly. She's in school now. That's wonderful, James said. I'm so proud of you, Margaret. Margaret felt strange hearing those words from her father. It was the first time anyone had ever said they were proud of her except her mother. What about you? Elena asked James, Are you married? Do you have other children? James shook his head. I was married once, for about 3 years. But it didn't work out. I never had children. Why not? James was quiet for a moment, because I never got over you. I compared every woman I met to you. No one ever measured up. Elena started crying again. I'm so sorry I ruined your life. You didn't ruin my life, James said gently. You were my life. When you left, I felt like half of me was missing. Margaret felt like she was intruding on something private. But she also felt like she was watching her parents fall in love again. I never married again either, Elena said. I never even dated. Much. I was too busy working and raising Margaret. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had stayed? James asked. Elena nodded. Every day. I wonder if we would have been happy. If Margaret would have had a better life. I think we would have been very happy, James said. I think we would have had a beautiful family. Margaret looked at her parents holding hands across the table. They looked like teenagers again, like the young couple in the photograph. It's not too late, Margaret said quietly. Both of her parents looked at her. What do you mean? Elena asked. I mean you're both still here. You're both still single. You still love each other. I can see it in your eyes. James squeezed Elena's hand. She's right. I never stopped loving you, Elena, not for one day in 25 years. I never stopped loving you either, Elena whispered. But so much time has passed. We're different people now. Are we? James asked. I feel like that 20-year-old boy when I look at you. I feel like no time has passed at all. Elena looked into his eyes. I feel the same way, but I'm scared. What if we try again and it doesn't work out? What if your family still doesn't accept me? My parents are gone, James said. They died years ago. And even if they were still alive, it wouldn't matter. I'm not a young man anymore. I make my own choices. But I'm not the same person you fell in love with, Elena said. I'm older. I'm tired. I work as a cleaning lady. I live in a small apartment. I'm not the art student you remember. James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You're the woman I love. That's all that matters. Margaret felt tears in her own eyes. She was watching her parents' love story come back to life. It was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at the same time. I want to try again, Elena said softly. I want to see if we can make this work. I want that too, James said. More than anything. They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands and looking at each other. Margaret felt like she was watching a miracle happen. Where do we start? Elena asked. We start with the truth, James said. No more secrets. No more running away. We tell each other everything, Elena nodded. Everything. And we go slow, James said. We get to know each other again. We build trust. And we include Margaret, Elena said. She's part of this too. James looked at his daughter. I have 23 years of catching up to do with you. I want to know everything about you, your favorite color, your favorite food, your dreams, your fears, everything, Margaret smiled. I'd like that, and I want to help you finish school, James said. I want to make sure you don't have to work so hard. You don't have to do that, Margaret said. Yes, I do, James said firmly. I missed 23 years of being your father. Let me start now, Elena squeezed his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me, James said. Thank you for raising her so well. Thank you for giving me the most amazing daughter in the world. Margaret felt overwhelmed with emotion. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a complete family. It was messy and complicated and fragile, but it was real. There's something else, James said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small black box. I've been carrying this for 25 years. Elena looked at the box and started crying again. James, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said. He opened the box and took out the ring. I bought this for you in 1999. I was going to ask you to marry me the day after graduation. He got down on one knee right there in the cafe. Other customers turned to look. Margaret held her breath. Elena-chan, James said, will you marry me? Elena looked at the ring. The same ring she had dreamed about for 25 years. The ring that matched the one on her finger. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. James slipped the ring onto her finger. Elena looked at her hands. She was wearing both rings now. The promise ring and the engagement ring. The past and the future. 3 weeks later, Margaret stood in front of the mirror in her mother's bedroom. She was wearing a simple white dress and the ring her mother had given her for her 18th birthday. Today was her parents' wedding day, a small ceremony. Just a few friends and some of James's business associates. Margaret was her mother's maid of honor. She had never seen her mother look so happy. Elena was wearing a cream-colored dress and both of her rings. The promise ring James had given her 25 years ago, and the engagement ring he had given her 3 weeks ago. She looked beautiful, and young and full of joy. Are you ready, Mom? Margaret asked. Elena nodded. I've been ready for 25 years. They walked downstairs to the living room of James's house. It was a big house with beautiful furniture and paintings on the walls. Margaret was still getting used to how different James's life was from theirs. James was waiting at the front of the room with the minister. He was wearing a black suit and a huge smile. When he saw Elena walking toward him, his eyes filled with tears. Margaret sat in the front row and watched her parents get married. They looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. When they said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. I promise to love you for the rest of my life, James said. I promise to never let you go again. I promise to be brave, Elena said. I promise to choose love over fear. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," James and Elena kissed like they were 20 years old again. Margaret clapped and cried and felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After the ceremony, they had a small reception in James's backyard. There was music and dancing and a beautiful cake. Margaret watched her parents dance together and remembered the photograph she had seen that night at the restaurant. They looked just as happy now as they had then. James had insisted on paying for Margaret's nursing school. She had quit her job at Romano's and was now a full-time student. She was getting better grades and sleeping more. She even had time to make friends and go on dates. "I'm so proud of you," James said to Margaret during the reception. "You're going to be an amazing nurse." "Thank you, Dad," Margaret said. It still felt strange to call him that, but good strange. "I'm sorry I missed so much of your life," James said, "but I'm going to make up for it now." "You don't have to make up for anything," Margaret said. "You're here now, that's what matters." James hugged her tightly. "I love you, Margaret." "I know. It's probably too soon to say that, but I do." "I love you too, Dad," Margaret said. And she meant it. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, Margaret found her parents sitting on the porch swing. They were holding hands and looking at the stars. "Thank you," Elena said to Margaret. "For what?" "For being brave when I wasn't, for pushing me to face the truth, for bringing us back together." Margaret sat down in the chair next to them. "I didn't do anything special. I just served a man his dinner." "You did more than that," James said. "You gave me back my family." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Margaret thought about how much her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She had gone from being a fatherless girl working in a restaurant to being part of a real family. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. "Now we live happily ever after," Elena said with a smile. "It's not going to be that easy," James said. "We have a lot of years to make up for. We have to learn how to be a family." "We'll figure it out," Elena said. "We have the rest of our lives to get it right." Margaret looked at her parents' rings catching the light from the porch lamp. Those rings had started this whole story. They had brought her family together. "I have something for you," Margaret said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Open it," Margaret said. Elena unwrapped the box carefully. Inside was a third ring. It looked similar to the other two, but slightly different. It had the same green stone, but the carved designs were unique. "I had it made," Margaret said. "I wanted us all to have matching rings. A family set." James looked at the ring closely. "This is beautiful, Margaret." "But you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Margaret said. "You two have rings that represent your love for each other. I wanted a ring that represents our family." "Oh, 3 of us," Elena started crying again. "It's perfect." Margaret slipped the ring onto her left hand. Elena was wearing her rings on her right hand. James put his ring on his left hand next to his wedding band. "Now we all match," Margaret said. They held up their hands together. 3 rings. 3 people. 1 family. "I have an idea," James said. "Let's go back to San Francisco for our honeymoon. I want to show Elena how much the city has changed. And I want to show Margaret where we fell in love." "That sounds wonderful," Elena said. "Can we visit your old college?" Margaret asked. "Of course," James said. "I want to show you everything. The art building where your mother painted, the cafe where we had our first date, the park where we used to study together." Margaret was excited to see where her parents' love story had begun. She wanted to walk the same paths they had walked. She wanted to see the places that had shaped who they were. "And maybe we can visit the jewelry store where you bought the rings," Elena said. "It's probably not there anymore," James said, "but we can try to find it." They talked for hours about their plans, about the future, about all the things they wanted to do together as a family. Margaret had never heard her mother talk so much about the future. For 23 years, Elena had lived day by day just trying to survive. Now she was making plans and dreaming dreams. As the night got later, Margaret started to feel tired. She had school in the morning and she wanted to be well rested. I should go home, she said. This is your home now too, James said. We converted the guest room into a bedroom for you. Your mother and I want you to move in with us. Margaret looked at her parents. They both looked hopeful. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your new marriage. You're not intruding, Elena said. You're our daughter. We want you here, Margaret smiled. Okay, but I need to keep some independence. I want to pay for my own groceries and help with the housework. Deal, James said. Margaret hugged both of her parents goodnight. As she walked upstairs to her new bedroom, she thought about how much her life had changed. A month ago, she was a tired waitress living in a small apartment with her secretive mother. Now she was part of a real family living in a beautiful house. With parents who loved each other, she got ready for bed and looked at her new ring. It sparkled in the light from her bedside lamp. She thought about all the things that had to happen for this moment to be possible. Her mother had to be brave enough to leave her old life behind. She had to be brave enough to come back. James had to be patient enough to wait 25 years for love to find him again, and Margaret had to be in the right place at the right time, wearing the right ring, serving the right customer. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had called in sick that night, or if she had been assigned to different tables, or if she had been wearing a different ring. Would her family ever have found each other? But she tried not to think about that. Some things were just meant to be. Some love stories were strong enough to survive 25 years of separation. Some families were meant to be together, no matter how long it took. Margaret turned off the light and lay down in her new bed. Through her window, she could see the city lights of Chicago. Somewhere out there, other families were being torn apart by fear and misunderstanding. But somewhere else, other families were being brought back together by love and hope. She touched her ring one more time and smiled. Tomorrow she would start classes again. She would study hard and become a nurse. She would help sick people get better. She would make a difference in the world. But tonight, she was just a daughter sleeping in her father's house, listening to her parents talking and laughing downstairs. She was part of a family that had found its way back to each other after 25 years of being lost. She closed her eyes and fell asleep with a smile on her face. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight from the window, sparkling like a small star in the darkness. Outside, the city of Chicago continued its busy life, but inside the house, 3 people who belonged together were finally home. The rings had done their job. They had brought a family back together, and they would continue to sparkle on 3 hands, reminding everyone who saw them that love is stronger than fear, that family is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most important things in life come to us when we least expect them. Margaret's story had started with a simple question about a ring, but it had become something much bigger. It had become a story about love, forgiveness, second chances, and the power of family, and like all the best love stories, it had a happy ending.